For the last couple of years, the name TVS Apache has meant an extra dose of excitement. Back in 2016, the Apache RTR 200 really impressed us. And then late last year, the Apache RR 310 just blew us away. Now though, it's the turn of the Apache RTR 160. But don't think for one second that this is merely a cosmetic update or just a facelift, because this Apache RTR 160 4V is a brand new motorcycle. And a hint of one of the biggest changes is in the name, 4V. Yes, as the name suggests, this Apache 160's motor has a 4-valve head, much like the Apache RTR 200. In fact, this whole engine has been derived from the 200. While its bore and stroke figures have been kept identical to those on the earlier 160, the compression ratio has been bumped up. It is an air-cooled motor, but to assist in heat management, it also features an oil cooler. There's also a duct behind the tank shrouds to channel air to the engine, and it gets fuel injection as well. The end result is the best power and torque figures for a 160cc single-cylinder air-cooled motor, 16.8 PS and 14.8 Nm respectively, and the best power-to-weight figure in its class as well. You also have the option of getting the bike in a carburetor setup. Why a carburetor, you ask? Well, firstly, it keeps the starting price low, makes it easier, more affordable to jump onto the Apache brand. And secondly, according to TVS's own claims, the carb bike gets to 60 km/h a bit quicker than the FI version. And that's despite making a little less power when compared to the FI. TVS claims that the carbureted bike does 0 to 60 in just 4.73 seconds. Acceleration feels brisk but linear, and there's plenty of pull to be had even in the mid-range. The motor's tractability is extremely impressive as well, as it can pull from speeds as low as 30 km/h in 5th gear without any signs of strain or lugging. One big highlight of this engine has to be its refinement. It is extremely smooth. There are almost no vibrations even high up in the rev range. Okay, you get a bit of buzz at 9000 RPM in the tank and the center panel, but that goes away past 10,000 and it's smooth once again all the way up to its red line of 11,500 RPM. This has to be one of, if not the smoothest motor in this class. There is a bit of difference in the way the carb and the FI bike feel though. Throttle response on the FI is a little bit sharper and it doesn't run out of steam even at the top end. The carb bike on the other hand feels a little gruntier, though it is a little gruff as well. But on the whole, in many ways, the carb bike actually feels more enjoyable to ride. And that's also because it has a slightly stronger pull in the mid-range. That said, as impressive as this engine is, it's missing that raw character that earlier RTRs were known for. And that reflects even in its exhaust note, which even with the same muffler as the RTR 200 feels a bit flat. But it's not just the RTR 200's motor that has made its way to this RTR 160. So has its chassis, which TVS says is race derived. This main diamond frame on the 160 has been lifted straight off the RTR 200. The only real difference in the chassis of these two motorcycles is this rear subframe, but we'll get to that in a bit. Now this chassis is extremely rigid and that has allowed for the suspension to be tuned really well. Now the 160 makes do with 33mm dia front forks, unlike the 38mm on the RTR 200. But don't think that means this bike is any less stable. These forks and even that monoshock impact have been made and tuned by Showa, and that endows this bike with fantastic handling abilities. Now this TVS test track is basically two long straights with one huge right-hander,
and we put in quite a few laps on this track with this bike, and I can say with confidence that it handles right-handers really well. Okay, jokes aside, it turns in really quickly, but at the same time, it doesn't feel twitchy or nervous like the old 160. It's actually very planted.
Braking setup too is borrowed from its larger sibling, and it gets pedal disc rotors at both ends. But of the three variants on offer, the entry-level one gets a 130mm drum at the back. It's equipped with TVS Remora tires at both ends, a 90x90 up front and a 130x70 at the rear. But that rear rubber is only offered on the rear disc brake variants, as the rear drum variant gets a 110x80 rear.
But one big disappointment were the brakes. The front brake lever feels spongy, and there's almost no feel from what's happening at the front end at the brake lever, and even bite is not all that great. In fact, a couple of times under very hard braking, we got massive brake fade. Not the best feeling.
While the brakes won't be an issue for everyday use, if you're riding hard and fast, such as on a racetrack, you will need to recalibrate braking distances in your head.
And on top of that, TVS isn't even offering ABS as an option. So I guess we'll have to wait till the April 2019 mandate to get ABS on this RTR 160.
Visually, this Apache RTR 160 4V looks almost identical to the 200. It carries over the same headlight design with LED DRLs, the same chunky tank with its offset fuel filler, the same panels, although the tail panel is slightly different, and even the same LED tail light. The instrument cluster too has been seen before on the 200. The only change here is that the carbureted bike gets one with an orange backlight and misses out on a gear indicator, lap timer and fuel efficiency meter.
But there are some differences here as well, such as this center panel, which is finished in silver as opposed to the dark grey or black that you find on the RTR 200. Even the 200's clip-ons have been ditched in favor of a one-piece handlebar, which I think personally looks very nice on this kind of a setup. And as I mentioned before, the subframe is different, and that's because the seat setup has been changed. Gone are the split seats, instead replaced by this contoured single-piece seat. But is it comfortable? Well, a seat height of 800mm isn't exactly short. I'm about 5'10" and I can get my feet flat on the ground, but someone shorter might find it a bit of a stretch. That said, the seat and the bike itself is fairly narrow, so it shouldn't be too much of an issue. And even the seat, for example, is fairly comfortable for someone who's as fat like me.
The pillion part of the seat, on the other hand, though comfortable, isn't very large. But overall, it's a bike that should fit most people, as the riding posture too isn't very aggressive, something you can happily use for the daily grind.
So by now it's very clear that even though it looks like the RTR 200, this RTR 160 4V is a very different motorcycle, and it is a big step up from the older 160. But is it race derived as TVS claims? Well, the handling is sublime. It turns in with such precision, it's very planted, and even the motor, even though it doesn't have the same punch as the older Apache, it is a very quick bike. But it doesn't play in a segment where handling and performance are the be-all and end-all. It has to be very usable as well, and on that front, the motor is very smooth, refined, it's also very tractable, and the bike rides beautifully as well.
Apache purists might feel that this new 160 has lost some of its RTR-ness, but it's become a bike that really will do most things quite well, whether it's commuting, sport riding in the twisties, or even clocking some highway miles. It certainly feels like a bike you can live with and have fun on at the same time. And that, in our book, earns it high praise.